morning. My name is Carrie Helmick, and I promise that all your teachers won't have the same name. But I brought a picture of my family today. Stephen and I have been married for 21 years. We met in high school, which I always thought was really cheesy, but here we are. He is in elementary education, and Stephen adds a lot of fun energy to our home, which I'm really grateful for because that is not what I bring to our home. Emma is our oldest on the left there. She's 16, she's a junior in high school. Emma likes swimming, but she's not very competitive, so I call it non-competitive swimming. And she also likes to babysit when she's not with friends, which is most of her time. Drew, in the middle there by me, is our next one. He is 14. He's a freshman in high school this year. And Drew really likes cross country and mountain biking, and he's really an old soul, so he's always really liked hot tea from a young age. Sophie is on the right here. She is 12 in 7th grade. Sophie is all things dance and has known that about herself from a young age. She's also a real leader, which I did not recognize about her until she went to school. I knew she was independent, I knew she was confident, but I didn't recognize that as leadership until some of her teachers and other adults in her life recognized that as such and put her in those roles, which I feel really grateful for. And then Eliza she's the shortest one. She's our caboose. She's 10. She's in 5th grade. She is very quick-witted and very spunky. She also likes to be involved in every conversation, and she's probably our most competitive, and soccer is her healthiest outlet to express that. I work as a nurse at Children's Hospital, and when I'm not doing all of those things, I have discovered that adult Carrie likes to read. And usually that's with my ears, but this year I've been practicing like calming myself down at night by reading a real book. So I'm just starting to maybe like physical books in front of me. This next picture is also a picture of what my life looks like right now. This was a little bit less than 2 weeks ago. Stephen called me, I was at work, and called to tell me that Drew had been in a mountain biking accident when he was biking with his school team, and they were headed to the emergency department. So he was like, just meet me downstairs. And I did, and despite the imprint of handlebars on his chest and the large dent in his helmet, he just had a broken arm. And it's very fixable. I feel really thankful for that. Though he has experienced the end of his cross-country and mountain biking season a couple days before they started this year. So that's a picture of our current reality. Now, I don't know if you guys have had kids that have broken bones yet. This is my 3rd child to break an arm. And some have been more obvious breaks than others. We were pretty sure this one was broken. But here's the thing. We knew that going to the emergency department was going to cost time and money, whether his arm was broken or not. And both Stephen and I were pretty exhausted, in case you couldn't tell by our eyes in that photo. We were exhausted from long days of work. We knew we'd have to go back to work the next day. And I think every hospital emergency department is not known for its speed. But we also knew that if Drew's arm was broken, we had a brief window in which we could get it fixed before the further swelling would inhibit his already limited mobility. And if his arm started healing incorrectly, it could lead to long-term problems. And this is the idea behind disciplining our kids now. We have a brief window of time in which we can lean in and consistently, not constantly, but consistently correct behavior. Even when it's inconvenient and takes a lot of time, not because it's easy, but because it doesn't get easier if we don't lean in. I'm going to give you 3 examples of that. The first one is teenagers. I currently have 2 and am just a couple months away from having 3 teenagers. And I can tell you from firsthand experience that my teenagers do not like to listen to my correction more than they did as toddlers. The second example is college-age kids. I personally don't remember talking to my kids in college. I'm sure, not my kids, my parents, when I was in college. Maybe you guys did, I don't know, I just don't remember it. Okay, third example, adults. Have you ever attempted to teach your husband the right way to do something? Like putting his clothes where you think they should be, or maybe putting your daughter's hair into a ponytail, or maybe you're the one that can't seem to put your keys in the right spot when you need them. Adults are hard to teach. So if you hear a voice in your head that says, this is too hard right now, but it will get easier, that voice is flat out lying to you. It doesn't. In the emergency department, they were able to set Drew's bone in its proper place without surgery, but it did require 6 attempts for an IV that worked because they needed an IV in his broken, swollen arm. And then the doctor literally moved the bone back into place with his bare hands, which I will spare the details because I realize some of you don't find that interesting. But just like setting a bone, disciplining our kids can initially seem like it makes the situation worse and causes more pain. But as parents, being the ones with a fully developed frontal lobe, we need to play the long game. We need to see future goals, not just immediate gratification. And that's not easy. So today we're going to look at 4 characteristics of God's pattern of discipline, and then we're going to talk through some legitimate reasons that might keep us from disciplining our kids now. I'm going to read Proverbs 3, verses 11 through 12 in the ESV version, and they use a word called reproof, which I've heard of, but I don't know that I've heard it conversationally, so I looked it up. And dictionary.com says that reproof means to gently correct. So Proverbs 3, 11 through 12 says, "My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline or be weary of his reproof. For the Lord reproves him whom he loves, as a father the son in whom he delights." Now, Carrie mentioned last week that discipline is synonymous with love, not opposed to it. God's discipline is always loving. In these verses, there's an expectation set forth that parents love their children, and gently correcting our children is evidence of that love. Now, this might look different for different kids. If my family is trying to decide on a place for the 6 of us to eat out, some of my kids have strong opinions. They aren't afraid to voice them, and they will probably try to convince the rest of us that their opinion is the best option. And as I discipline and guide these kids, I'm encouraging kind communication, self-control, patience, flexibility. And in the same conversation, I have other kids who don't really like to make decisions. They would prefer for others to make their decisions, and they possibly don't even know what they really like to eat. And as I discipline and guide these kids, I'm encouraging them to use their voice, to recognize their value, to be brave enough to figure out what kinds of foods they enjoy, and realize that their decisions don't determine their worth. Loving each of my kids individually, knowing them, understanding who they are created to be, allows me to train each of them differently, depending on what they need encouragement to grow in. And isn't this how God loves us? He meets us where we're at, and he gently guides our hearts to look more like his. And God certainly does not connect love to discipline in a way that correct behavior earns more of his love. He loves us first and corrects us gently because he loves us, because God's discipline and his love go together. God's discipline is also intentional. He doesn't react impulsively or rashly. He doesn't correct everything all at once. And this is challenging as parents. I cannot count the times that one of my kids will get a Band-Aid, and I only know this because the tin of Band-Aids is on the counter open, and a used Band-Aid wrapper is beside it. And I can tell you that my first reaction isn't, oh, who needed a Band-Aid? I hope they're okay. Nor do I think, I'm sure something reasonable must have suddenly happened where they didn't have to throw away their trash and put the Band-Aids up. I usually react with something snarky, like, I'm your mom, not your maid, and I get frustrated because I get tired of teaching the same thing over and over for something that feels really basic to me. Now, I'm not saying that my kids are innocent in their Band-Aid endeavors, but I am saying that we have a God that doesn't get tired. We have a God who is always right in his judgments, and he fully sees our hearts. He's endlessly patient with us. He doesn't react out of impulsive anger and start listing all the ways that we've failed him in some sort of rage. God's discipline is intentional. The third thing is that God's discipline always has the goal of restoration. Discipline means training, not punishment. And I'm going to say that again just to let it kind of sink in. Discipline means training, not punishment. Sometimes there are consequences to actions, but God's discipline isn't a power trip. If my kids speak unkindly to each other or to me, it's really easy to try and regain control of the situation and demand that kind words be used, kinder words than probably the ones that I'm using to demand the kindness. Our discipline can address the heart issue rather than just the symptoms by teaching empathy and understanding and recognizing that our words matter, but also the way we say words matters. And the reason why words matter is because people matter, because relationships matter. God disciplines us because he wants true relationship with us. He doesn't withhold his love from us until we get our act together. And as we discipline our kids, we need to keep in mind that the goal is to stay in relationship with them, because God's discipline restores. And the last characteristic that I want to highlight about God's discipline is that God's discipline is for our good. Now, I want my children to grow into spiritually, emotionally, and physically healthy adults to the best of their ability. That is in their best interest. The goal cannot be to raise happy, compliant children. It's too short-sighted. And because I care about my kids, I want to be willing to make hard decisions now that make it easier for them later. Because God willing, most of the years of their life will be spent outside my home. Now, we've let our girls get their ears pierced when they turn 10 years old, which is not a parenting recommendation. But for Eliza, that was last October. She was really excited. We took her to get her ears pierced after school on her birthday, and we took her to the same place that we got Emma and Sophie's ears pierced. She was so brave, so proud of her new earrings. And when we got home, we realized that they were not symmetrical. And we had a decision to make. We could leave them in, pretend like they were fine, and let Eliza decide if it mattered to her later in life. Or we could crush her enthusiasm on her birthday and remove the earrings so that these holes could close and then get them re-pierced, which would also cost more money and time. Eliza wanted to keep the earrings in, obviously, but we decided to take out the earrings. Eliza had to wait 2 weeks to get them re-pierced, which is scarier the second time because you're no longer innocent to the fact that it kind of hurts. The new place that we got them pierced told her that she had to leave the earrings in for 6 months to make sure that the right holes stayed and the wrong holes didn't, which meant she didn't get to change out her earrings for Christmas like she'd been hoping and had picked out the little gingerbread men. And this was understandably really disappointing to Eliza, who had been looking forward to getting her ears pierced, had told her friends about it, then had to go back to school without earrings in, answer the questions from her friends to kind of like relive what felt so sad to her. And it was hard as her parents to make a decision that we thought was best for the long term, knowing that it would devastate her in the present. We told Eliza that we were trying to make a decision that adult Eliza would be thankful for. But honestly, who knows how adult Eliza will look back on this decision, and we won't know for a couple decades. We walked through many tears with her, empathizing with her disappointment, but also knowing that it was the most loving thing that we knew to do. Hebrews chapter 12, verses 10 through 11 says, "For they," our parents, "disciplined us for a short time, as it seemed best to them. But he," being God, "disciplines us for our good, that we may share his holiness. For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it." Hebrews acknowledges that we as parents don't always get things right, even when we're doing what seemed best. But God is always disciplining us for our good, and he already knows what is good for us. God's discipline gives us an example to follow of how we can lean into the discipline with our kids, with love, with intentionality, with the goal of reconciliation, and for their good. So, what keeps us from leaning into discipline now? When I was brainstorming answers to this question, my hand really couldn't keep up with my brain. So this is certainly not an exhaustive list, though the fact that we're exhausted was definitely my first thought. We're tired. We don't want to disappoint our kids. It's hard to be consistent. We're disappointed that parenting is harder than we thought it would be. There are too many things to correct. It's hard to follow through. Sometimes the situation gets worse if you try to correct your child. It's vulnerable to try and discipline our kids in public. Other people feel judgy, and maybe they are. And what if we mess up our kids even more by our discipline? Honestly, I can't really explain these answers away. The reality is we do mess up our kids in some ways, and hopefully that points them to Jesus. But parenting is hard, and good parenting is even harder. We don't always know if we're doing it right, but it's worth it. And we grow as parents as we're helping our kids grow. And the hope is that if we're leaning into Jesus first and listening to the Holy Spirit as we parent, then we will know when to lean in and what to lean into, and when to use self-control and not correct and give grace, and when we need to apologize because we got it wrong. Galatians 6:9 says, "And let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up." I love this analogy of sowing and reaping that Paul is talking about. Now, I don't have even like the slightest shade of a green thumb, but I do know that plants don't grow without a seed. And if we think of a garden, the seeds that you plant grow, and the seeds you do not plant do not grow. And if a part of the garden gets no seeds, you kind of hope that nothing grows, but sometimes weeds grow everywhere because they really try hard to do that. So if you want a beautiful, productive garden, it takes vision, it takes purpose, it takes diligence, it takes maintenance, and maybe then you'll see some fruit. But you can't give up when the soil looks barren. You wait patiently and keep watering because something is growing within the ground. You can't give up when the first green leaf breaks through because you're not done. That's not usually where the fruit is. You really can't ever give up, which is why I don't like gardening. But we have children who are counting on us to not give up on them. I want to close by reading out part of a devotional from a She Reads Truth study on thankfulness that was actually from their study in 2018. When my son was 3, he loved to see things done over and over again. Horsey ride? Do it again. Final chapter of a book? Start it again. Maybe you have or know children like this, children who delight in simple things. Author G.K. Chesterton wonderfully likened the delight of children to that of God's joy over his creation. He described it in this way: because children have abounding vitality, because they are in spirit fierce and free, therefore they want things repeated and unchanged. They always say, "Do it again," and the grown-up person does it again until he is nearly dead. For grown-up people are not strong enough to exult in monotony. But perhaps God is strong enough to exult in monotony. It is possible that God says every morning, do it again to the sun, and every evening, do it again to the moon. It may not be automatic necessity that makes all daisies alike. It may be that God makes every daisy separately, but has never got tired of making them. It may be that he has the eternal appetite of infancy, for we have sinned and grown old, and our Father is younger than we. Our Father has the energy to forever celebrate and endlessly love. And if there's one thing that's worth repeating 26 times, like in Psalm 136, it's that his faithful love endures forever. But the psalmist isn't just repeating these words, he's listing example after example of how God has shown his faithful love to his people. And this insistent repetition shows us how his love isn't just repeated in the past, because he continues to love us in the future, again and again, forever. We are sinful and just tired out. We grow weary of giving one more horsey ride, handling one more irate customer, navigating another family conflict, and facing yet another rejection. But God's love is new every morning, and our only response to his steadfast love ought to be thankfulness. Even when we don't have the energy or enthusiasm to celebrate the sunrise, let alone say, do it again in those dark morning hours, God's love for us and for his creation remains unbounded. He loves us again and again and again and again. As parents, God's love for us shows us how to love our kids. And this love is motivation to lean in now and discipline them in this brief window that we have in their lives. What a hard challenge, but what a beautiful privilege. Let me close us in prayer. God, thank you for giving us children that you've entrusted into our care. Give us endurance. Give us vision. Give us hope. Help us not to lean on our own strength to parent our kids, but help us turn to you. Help us listen to your voice. Thank you for being a God who loved us first. Amen.